Well, good morning. As many of you know, Representative Barca and I serve as the Democratic representatives on the board of Governor Walker's Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. This agency, which was created by Governor Walker and which he serves as chairman of the board, has been on shaky ground since its inception. It was created with little planning, and there has been a laundry list of problems, including mismanagement of taxpayer resources along the way. The entrepreneurs and workers of Wisconsin have paid the price for the continual chaos at WEDC. As you know, Wisconsin is 40th in the nation in job creation and 42nd in wage growth. Unfortunately, we found out in the last week the problems at Governor Walker's WEDC appear to go beyond simple mismanagement. Last week, a troubling Legislative Audit Bureau report documented continual problems at WEDC. The audit found that WEDC is still not operating in compliance with all state laws or even with its own board-approved policies. As board members, we are deeply concerned, and we called for immediate action. Following the audit last Thursday, we called on Governor Walker as chairman of the WEDC board and Dan Ahrens as vice chairman to hold an emergency WEDC board meeting in the next 2 weeks in response to the recent audit. We also asked Representative Kirkman and Senator Coles, co-chairs of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, to schedule a hearing as soon as possible in response to the audit. We also have called upon the co-chairs of the Joint Finance Committee to remove WEDC from this week's agenda for the Joint Finance Committee until we can find out more of what is happening at this troubled agency in response to the audit. But Governor Walker continues to be, unfortunately, more concerned with managing his public image in the midst of his presidential run than he is in addressing the problems at the agency that he has created. On Friday, in an attempt to get ahead of Sunday's damaging headlines, Governor Walker once again proposed completely upending the state's job creation programs simply as a way of deflecting attention from the fact that his aides apparently used their influence to swing a WEDC loan to one of his campaign contributors. Throughout this process, we as WEDC legislative board members have been kept in the dark. We are not kept abreast of the agency's internal problems, and we're not consulted in addressing the serious issues identified by the most recent audit or in the governor's recent plans to completely overturn WEDC's programs. We just met as a board about 2 weeks ago, and Governor Walker, as chairman of that board, did not present any of these ideas, including calling off the agency mergers or ending WEDC's loan programs. What is the point of having a private sector board if you are not going to consult with them especially on these major issues? It is clear that the governor is simply reacting to events as he's focused on running for president and is not focused on helping Wisconsin entrepreneurs or in creating jobs for the people of the state of Wisconsin. And I turn things over to Representative Barca.
Thank you. Senator Lassa indicated there's going an ongoing pattern of failed leadership at Governor Walker's jobs agency. Being 40th in the country, falling behind in terms of personal wages is just so incredibly disappointing. But even worse, this weekend we learned of possible corruption going on in Governor Walker's jobs agency. The State Journal broke a story that indicates that Governor Walker's WEDC may have granted a loan as a favor to one of his major campaign contributors, one of 32 people that gave the maximum donation during his first run for governor. I suspect that there will be many more details that we'll learn in the coming days, but what we do know is that at least $500,000, $500,000 in taxpayer funds were wasted by Governor Walker and his administration on a loan that never should have been granted to a major campaign contributor. As a taxpayer and someone who cares deeply about economic development in this state, as a legislator and a board member, I'm outraged that we have not been brought up to date and that continually we do not have access to this type of information that is so vital. The investigation, we found, at least from what's been reported so far, potentially a disappearance of records of the loan in question. The required paperwork is missing. Now that just does not happen, and that is outrageous. Secondly, potentially fraudulent actions on the part of the business owner who appears to have falsified his form. And in fact, a simple review of CCAP by the underwriters or anybody at that agency would have found that when that borrower checked the box saying they had no legal encumbrances, it was clear that they did, and this loan should not have been granted. And serious questions about the role of Governor Walker's top aides, then Secretary of Administration Mike Huebsch, his campaign manager Keith Jilt, and others who may have influenced the improper granting of this loan. That's why today Senator Lassa and I are calling for an independent federal investigation of Governor Walker's WEDC. We're calling on Attorney General Loretta Lynch and the U.S. attorneys in Wisconsin to investigate the Building Committee Incorporated company and the loan that was granted to them and the job agency's failure to follow the proper procedures, as well as the disappearance of the documents involved with the granting of that loan. We're deeply concerned with the ongoing pattern of inconsistencies at WEDC and troubled by the appearance of taxpayer dollars being funneled to political campaign donors by government officials. It's essential that we have a federal investigation, an independent investigation, to analyze if in fact there is wrongdoing, if in fact there's corruption, and certainly what has happened to these missing records, which there is no excuse for not having this documentation. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
The Republicans have said that we did receive, or maybe board members did receive some updates on failed loans, not maybe specifically highlighting this one. Do you recall receiving as board members materials that would detail loans that were delinquent that might have included this loan?
Well, let me mention this. I mean, first of all, we have made requests to have access to a document called Salesforce that is available to the staff and certainly to Governor Walker as chairman of the board. And, let it be known, I mean, we have a fiduciary responsibility as board members. We understand that, and that's why we're calling for this independent investigation. But we do not have access to this type of documentation. The only loans that are brought to our attention are major loans dealing with tax credits, and those come up in a closed session. Certainly loans of this sort do not appear before us, and we do not have access to those records. In terms of loans that are being charged off or loans that were behind in collections, we were given documents in terms of just listing those loans so that we could have some idea of the number of companies that are behind in their loans by 30 days or 60 days or 90 days or more. That we do have access to. We've asked them to bring to the attention of the board those that are of major concern to the staff. And they have done that with some loans. For instance, the Kestrel group up at Superior. We've talked about that at some length before. There are a number of other companies for which there's been a long period of non-payment. This loan was never highlighted to us in any meeting that we had. Do you want to add anything to that, Senator Lassa?
No, I think what's important to point out about this loan is that it was made even though, despite the objections of the underwriters over at the WEDC, and that at first the loan that they were after was for $4.3 million. And because of the concerns that were raised apparently by former WEDC CEO Paul Jaden, that number was winnowed down, according to news reports, to $500,000. But he was still concerned about the loan itself and that it was extremely risky, which is why they did not, when they were approached again for additional taxpayer funds, they did not receive any.
Is there any recourse for recovery? Is the money just gone?
Well, for any loan, there's a recourse for recovery, but it's an excellent question, and let me frame this for you. Under the Department of Commerce, at least for the last few years of Commerce, when I was back in the legislature, unsecured loans were very rare. Generally speaking, the reason why in loan documentations you ask for people who have a 20% interest or more in the company is because generally you ask people to make personal guarantees. Most loans, of course, are collateralized, meaning that if the company does not have sufficient assets to make the taxpayers whole, we ask the borrowers to personally guarantee their home. As was reported in the story at hand, apparently this person did not do this, and it was an unsecured loan. Of course, the loan documentation is not available, but hopefully they will find this documentation, and certainly hopefully there isn't some cover-up where this documentation is purposely been destroyed or is hidden.
Do you believe that the loan program should end?
Look, I think that the board needs to thoroughly review this program. Under Commerce, we had a loan program for I believe decades, certainly for many years. The Small Business Administration, that's the hallmark of what they provide, are government guaranteed loans. I know that Paul Rasmunder, who I talked with briefly, has indicated, and he's the head of the Loan Review Committee, that he's troubled by the idea of eliminating loans. And let's be clear, the issue of loans is that oftentimes for minority borrowers or for technology companies, that's usually the source of capital that they have available to them because most private sector lenders will not provide it to them. So it's a serious decision, and it bears careful consideration if Wisconsin is no longer going to be able to provide this source of funding for businesses. Now, clearly, this program has been mishandled. This loan in particular, as we indicated, never should have been granted. It was granted under fraudulent circumstances because this person checked a box saying they had no legal encumbrances, and in checking just a simple CCAP review would indicate that in fact it was error. I mean, that's sort of the bare minimum of what loan underwriters and you expect your agency's executives to look at. And so either it was not done, or in those disappearing loan documentations, we'll find out that there was a review, but the loan was granted anyway, which would be fraudulent on the part of the department as well, if in fact that were done. So I think it's a very serious consideration whether or not it should be eliminated. That's why Senator Lassa and I have called for an emergency meeting. As you know, in the governor's original budget proposal, he proposed the merger of WEDA and WEDC. When we met as a joint board, it was clear there was strong opposition to that proposal, and the governor dropped the idea. But as Senator Lassa rightfully indicated, what is the point of having a private sector board when the governor lurches from idea to idea without even consulting with the members of the board? To the best of our knowledge, he certainly did not consult with us. I don't believe he consulted with any board members. I believe he just put forward that idea, knowing, as Senator Lassa indicated, that this critical story was coming out. But it's a serious matter. Should the state of Wisconsin no longer have a loan program? I believe virtually every state in the nation has that type of access to capital for entrepreneurs, and for, again, for minority entrepreneurs, technology companies. This is an important source of capital for them.
So at this point, have you not decided? I mean, are you just on the fence as to whether the loan program should go away, or?
Well, the first I heard of it was 2 days ago, so that's where I want to have the time to thoroughly vet this, and I want to talk to the entrepreneurial community. I want to talk to the lending community to get their input. I mean, they're the experts that we depend upon to tell us how we can provide that critical capital for entrepreneurs. And this isn't just a political decision that should be made. Now, clearly it's a shame that it's so poorly handled that it seems like the easy solution would be to just do away with this program.
Does getting rid of the loan program address the concerns in this loan and in the audit?
Well, go ahead.
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is something that has occurred. It was a loan that shouldn't have been granted, where the underwriters were overruled, and $500,000 of taxpayer money was loaned to this company who didn't have the means to pay it back and also didn't qualify within the program because of some of the legal issues that it had. But the fact is that what this loan was made in the past, and what is troubling about the governor's decision to quickly pull the plug, or ask the legislature to pull the plug on WEDC's loan program, is that it seems to have been in reaction to the forthcoming news story on Sunday in the Wisconsin State Journal that talked about this particular loan.
Now, let me add to that.
If you drop the loan program, are you going to be confident that the other programs that will remain at WEDC will be handled correctly?
So what we need to do is make sure that the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, that there is a hearing, hopefully within the very near future, so that we can go through the findings of the audit to make sure that there's enough transparency and accountability within our programs, both within the loan program as well as in the grants program, because something similar obviously could happen there if there isn't enough accountability and transparency. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that within the near future. I'm also hoping that the co-chairs of the Joint Finance Committee will grant our request and hold off on taking up WEDC's budget as they were planned to do this week, because we do need to thoroughly vet and find out what has happened with this particular loan, and are there any other instances of similar type of situations that have occurred, whether it's in our loan program or in our grant program.
Right, let me just add to that, though. Let me be real clear. First of all, I agree with everything Senator Lassa said, but I would just add the simple answer is no, that it would not give me any confidence whatsoever. Because whether it's a tax credit that's provided, whether it's a workforce development program that's advanced for a given company, if we cannot count on the people who underwrite and administer this program to ensure that these companies are qualified to receive these funds, and that in fact the jobs are going to be created or some public good is going to take place, it doesn't make any difference whether it's a direct loan or whether it's a grant or whether it's a tax credit. That's the basis for which we have accountability for the taxpayers, and we can ensure that when you're putting forward taxpayer funds, that there's a public good that's being achieved, and that the person who's being provided these funds in fact is qualified to receive them, and in fact will follow through and ensure that the public good, whether it be jobs created or investments in new equipment, that will in fact take place.
Can I ask about your calling for a federal investigation? You're asking for Larry Lynch, who's appointed by President Obama. It seems like one of the big talking points in the John Doe lately has been that the investigator is Republican. Why would you ask Larry Lynch? You don't want to have the AG who wasn't engaged in talking this loan. Why a federal, not a state or a local?
Well, I think for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think we need an independent investigation. Secondly, if in fact there was corruption, that best is handled on a federal level. And they have more tools for investigating that. They have more resources, and federal law grants them, I believe, and I'm not an attorney and I'm not certainly never been a prosecutor, but in talking with past prosecutors, it's my understanding that they have more tools available at their disposal to conduct such an investigation.
What should happen to the $55 million that was supposed to go to WEDC that wants to do worker training program? Do you think that's where it should go?
Well, that's why we think we should wait until, first of all, the board should meet. Secondly, we should consult with the entrepreneurial community to find out what in fact will best suit the needs of helping to create jobs here in Wisconsin. Obviously, the governor's administration has a terrible track record in this regard, being 40th in the country. But that's why we're asking finance, hold off. Let's analyze this newest proposal that's come forward.
Peter, you talked before on other WEDC issues that there's at least been some question as to the appearance of pay to play. Do you think this latest revelation strongly suggests that, or how would you characterize this?
Just 1 second.
Sure. Well, I think,
Start with that.
you know, first of all, Greg, I think, one, that's why we're asking for an independent investigation, and so that they can look into any possible wrongdoing that has occurred at WEDC or involving anyone in Governor Walker's administration. It's also been pointed out by One Wisconsin Now when they did their 2014 analysis that according to them, Walker donors accounted for 30% of the recipients of WEDC incentives and have received nearly 60% of the funding. So, and they cited their report as well as information that they received from WEDC.
So what I would say is that, you know, certainly just that statistic alone, you know, draws suspicion. I mean, it just gives the appearance that, you know, that for people to do a second check. What's going on here? Is there favoritism in this program? But then, assuming that all the sources were correct, which I believe the State Journal is a very rigorous process for doing that, obviously the fact that loan documents have disappeared, the fact that a substantial loan was made that was questionable from the onset, and the fact that it was made just months after, you know, one of 32 people who made the maximum contribution to the governor's campaign, and the people involved in this meeting, as reported, weren't the head of WEDC. It was the governor's top aide on the government side and the governor's campaign manager on the campaign side. I mean, that just raises such suspicion beyond even just the simple statistic that we presented. And then when you find out that obviously the borrower, you know, according to the story, received the loan under fraudulent circumstances because they did not check the box that they had legal encumbrances. You know, raises the issue that it just cries out for an independent investigation to ensure that there is not pay-to-play going on here. And certainly to be able to determine whether or not there in fact are missing documents. I mean, which could suggest a cover-up. I'm not saying that there is one, but it's highly suspicious. I mean, I headed the Midwest for the Small Business Administration, and those documentation were taken very seriously, and there was a protocol for ensuring those records took place. Then in addition to that, Senator Lassa and I, as members of the board, heard about their putting forward a very expensive process to go to a paperless system so that, you know, if it's paperless, which I don't know if it was in place at that time or not, then it's virtually impossible to have disappearing records. But you know, and that's the other reason for an independent investigation is, are there other loans that are questionable? Are there other documents that are missing? We don't have access to those documents, but as members of the board that have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers, at this point, we better make sure that there's not other documents missing, or certainly that there isn't, you know, pay-to-play going on in this state.
Guys, is it time to go back to getting rid of WEDC entirely, going back to an actual agency? When WEDC was formed, there were all kinds of reports from other states that described the same thing, or the same kind of problems. And the donors getting favoritism, there were all kinds of reports out that this is a bad model to go with. I mean, they're again ready to scrap the model, you know, Republicans on board.
Well, Senator Lassa and I have talked about that at some length, and that's one of the issues that we want to bring up to the full board.
You mentioned earlier, you were saying that Secretary Jaden had basically put a stop to them getting additional money to this company. Then you bring up a report that's suggesting maybe a pattern. How do you reconcile those two things?
I think it's difficult, and that's why we need an independent investigation. Someone who's not connected with the state to come in and take a look at what's happening. I think based on the troubling audits that WEDC has received from the Legislative Audit Bureau, as well as the story that just ran this weekend, I think that it raises a lot of issues. And when I first read the story, I mean, to me, it just didn't pass the smell test, and that's why I think we need to move forward with this and
I guess my
look at
question's
independent.
more about if you're going to believe that there's a pattern of this going on, wouldn't Paul Jacob have been involved in some way? And not
Well,
just-
I mean, first of all, we're not saying that there's a pattern of this going on. I mean, however, obviously there's documentation that suggests that an unusually high number of loans have gone to the governor's donors. Now, you know, whether or not that was done inappropriately, we're not sure. I mean, but obviously we've been troubled for some time about this, and we've had ongoing talks. As you know, we've put forward reform legislation in the past 2 sessions of the legislature, only to have it stalled by the governor's allies, the Republican majority in the legislature. Even the board voted unanimously to have the board empowered, as most boards are, to hire and fire the CEO and the COO and the CFO, but the Republican majority would not bring that up for a vote. So we've had suspicions there could be some serious issues here, but with the revelations that came forward this weekend, we've passed the Rubicon. We've passed the point in which we believe that we can handle this internally within the board. We don't have access to the documentation, and I would hope the governor would join us in asking for an independent investigation, because he has an even higher level of fiduciary responsibility as chairman of the board.
So how critical is it for the board or joint audit to hear from Paul Jacob?
Well, I think it's very important that as part of the investigation that, you know, that former Secretary Jaden let people know what he knew about this particular loan or about other loans that perhaps he found troubling.
The governor told us in an interview this weekend when we asked, said people from both sides were calling for the agency to be scrapped. He said that must mean if both sides are calling on us to do that, that we're doing something right. What do you make of that?
I think the jobs numbers, tell the story. And the fact that the audit continues to point out troubling aspects of the agency. So I think that it's a clever way for the governor to spin an answer to that question. But obviously the facts don't have any relation to what his answer was.
Well, my understanding is that the governor's not calling for the agency to be scrapped. He's saying eliminate the loan program, have a greater presence in doing workforce development training, which seems completely duplicative of what, you know, the workforce development group does in the whole Fast Forward program. So it's unclear what he's asking for. I haven't seen anything in writing other than his press statement. Certainly, I would hope that finance would not go forward on Thursday. I don't know how they possibly could. I can't imagine that the governor will have drafted a cogent proposal, and certainly it will not have been one that's been vetted by the board or one that's been reviewed with the entrepreneurial community, and also the audit committee should meet. I mean, the whole reason for the audit coming out prior to the finance committee acting was so that we'd have the benefit of this audit. And the audit in and of itself, you know, raises so many troubling issues about, you know, loans being granted improperly without following the law, of the issues of not following board policy, which were very clear in terms of the policy that we're putting forward. And it raises so many troubling issues in and of itself before this even came up. And we called for that for the emergency board meeting last week before we even knew about this very serious allegation.
And I think
Last question. Won't put any more protocols in tracking who actually gets the tax credits? Because last year, Diane Hendricks, lobbyist from ABC, lobbied hard and passed a law that allows the tax credits to be transferred and even sold. So do you know where the money actually ends up after that extra layer of lack of transparency? Where does it go? And how do you know?
I think that would be over at the Department of Revenue, where they would have to track where that would be. But in getting back to your question, I think Governor Walker has in effect called for WEDC to be scrapped when he did propose a merger between WEDA and WEDC. I mean, that would have created the Wisconsin Forward Development Authority. So in a way, he has called for that agency to be scrapped, and that now he's just, because of presidential politics and the fact that he's trying to sweep the audit and now this news report under the rug, I mean, he's defending the agency, saying that everything is hunky-dory when we know that's not a fact.
Given Gary George's past record, is his involvement with this another cause for concern?
Well, I'm not sure when his involvement took place and if it was part of this latest circumstance or, clearly this group was trying to receive funds during the period when the stimulus money took place. And during that period, I know they were searching for funds and were not successful in granting them. So I have no idea in terms of, former Senator George's involvement. If he was, I assume at that point he was paid as an attorney to represent them and to try and find, funds from, some of the agencies that had stimulus funds. But it's not as clear from the, from the journal report, in fact, what kind of involvement he had. So.
If I could ask one question. Given how you guys have staffs and you know how closely you work with staffs, especially your top staffers, is it believable to you that the governor would have been talking about this with Pete Jokes or Mike Huebsch?
Well, I mean, it certainly raises a suspicion. I mean, first of all, the idea that he was not aware of one of 32 of the maximum donations is very difficult to believe. This is not when he was running in a recall, when he had millions of dollars coming in from all over the country. This is during his first run for governor. He only had 32 discrete, maximum $10,000 donations. So it's hard to imagine he wouldn't have been aware that he received that donation. Then, whether or not he knew of these meetings that took place is unclear, but let's not forget he's also chairman of the board. So I would think he should have been aware at some level of what was taking place, but whether or not he knew of these meetings and his involvement of his campaign manager, I mean, that's all, would I assume be part of an independent investigation. Thank you all.
Thoughts on voucher? Is that $12.8 million from the locals?
Well, look, it highlights to me that obviously